So I'm thinking we need to start a mutual admiration society because I think if I were to annotate the last few years of my professional career with sort of positive impact people, the interesting thing is that there's a bunch of those people who are sitting in this room who have given me their time and wisdom so that I can grow as a safety leader and hopefully impart that knowledge in the work that we do. So people like Todd Conklin and of course Charles. So I know most of you don't know me, but those of you who do know that I love sports. And I'm born and raised in Cleveland, which no fault of my parents, but it's not a particularly good combination. It's true that 9 years ago, the Cleveland Cavaliers did win the NBA Finals. We all still have our t-shirts and act like LeBron James is a close personal friend. But my lifetime, which now is extending well beyond half a century, it's really been pretty tough going for Cleveland sports fans. The Browns have never won a Super Bowl. And now we're just trying to generate excitement around the 144th draft pick. But it's summer, so for today I'd like to focus on baseball. In case you wondered, it's been 76 years since the Cleveland Indians, now called Guardians, won a World Series. It's the longest standing drought in Major League Baseball history. But you know what? There's no crying in baseball. And we're in the heart of the season, which is good because we're definitely not out of it. Hope springs eternal in Cleveland, and we have really low standards for what constitutes hope. In fact, at the moment, we are technically still in it and could win the pennant. So these baseball thoughts have me thinking about some of my favorite baseball movies, the feel-good kind. So between my disproportionate, unbridled Guardians optimism and the ever-present ability to stream great baseball flicks on the many streaming services that I pay for, I'm in a really good frame of mind to consider our work. So as background, in case you're naive, the state of healthcare safety sucks. 3 million deaths globally have been attributed to patient safety according to the World Health Organization. We spend $600 billion a year on patient safety events. A study in the New England Journal found that if you're an adult admitted to a US hospital, you have a 1 in 4 chance of experiencing a harmful event. So the organization I lead, Charles mentioned, is called the Children's Hospitals Solutions for Patient Safety, or SPS. It's a collaborative of 150 children's hospitals in the US and Canada that are working together to eliminate serious harm that happens to patients and employees. Our network focuses on the most common hospital-acquired harm that happens, including things like serious and deadly hospital-acquired infections. Some of you learned yesterday about unplanned extubations. This is when the breathing tube a baby or a child has that's connected to the ventilator becomes inadvertently dislodged, leading to respiratory arrest or cardiac arrest. Serious falls where babies fall out of bed and have major head injuries, medication dosing and administration errors, and for our staff, major musculoskeletal injuries that happen to, for example, a nurse who weighs 120 pounds who's trying to move a wiggly, uncooperative 200-pound adolescent, or she's moving patient equipment or bedding, or beds or other furniture, things that weigh twice as much as she does. We started in 2008 when some quite bold and enterprising executive leaders of children's hospitals broke invisible barriers of competition to authorize passionate clinicians to collaborate for the sole purpose of eliminating serious healthcare harm. And to the delight and amazement of everyone, within just about 2 years, it actually started to work. And we kind of started to brag about it, which prompted the federal government of the United States to issue us a DARE. One other little Cleveland trivia thing we're really proud of. Maybe you've seen A Christmas Story and you know about the double dog dare, which is what I think about every time I say the word dare. Don't put your tongue on a flagpole in the winter. But that wasn't the dare. In this case, CMS said to us, we'll give you some money if you'll spread it around the country. And I remember thinking to myself, spread what? Dude, we just got started. I don't even know if this is real. But we did it. And all of my hesitation now makes me think I should have watched Field of Dreams. Field of Dreams is an iconic movie in which Ray Kinsella, an Iowa farmer, is inspired by a voice that he can't ignore to pursue a dream he can hardly believe, to turn his ordinary cornfield into a place where dreams come true. The mantra that runs through the movie is the voice that appears whenever he has doubts. If you build it, he will come, which is often misquoted as, if you build it, they will come. And such was the beginning of SPS. But we're really pretty far from the end of the movie, and our dream definitely hasn't come true. But nevertheless, I want to share with you some of our major milestones that we've reached so far that I hope will make you feel proud of children's hospitals, and I hope will give you some optimism for safety and healthcare despite those awful numbers I shared with you. Unless you think I am overdosing on optimism, I'm going to sprinkle in what I see are some really serious strategic challenges and some hard lessons learned that we've had, major adjustments that we've had to make over the years as we go the distance. So the original meeting of the Ohio leaders was pretty magical, as I suggested, but maybe it was like a Buckeye thing. Would we really be able to spread this outside of the state of Ohio? And there's a whole bunch of stuff we got wrong, but we were either smart or lucky or both at the beginning when we developed some of our OG principles. We got those right. There's actually not a one of them that doesn't still make a lot of good sense today, 12 years later. There might be a couple more I'd add, but I want to talk to you about a couple of them today in no specific order. I'm going to start with, we won't compete on safety. So for this discussion, we might need like a sociologist or a psychologist, maybe a philosopher. Some competition, some benchmark, some goal to strive for is motivating and inspiring to people. However, I've observed that competition in the context of a learning collaborative, beyond very small doses, can be quite problematic. But of course, it's not as easy as just saying, okay, hey guys, let's not compete. In our world, competitive pressures come from all kinds of places, and each one really has some logical justification. The government, for example, imposes publicly reported measures and wishes to link performance with reimbursement. Seems like a reasonable motivational strategy and an important nod to transparency. We have all these business-minded people on our boards and leadership teams who want to differentiate the hospital to increase market share and ability to attract talent. And they're attempted to use safety performance as a lever for that, kind of like the US News and World Report hospital rankings. All this is easily justified because, as is often said, no margin, no mission. It's also popular on children's hospital boards to put financial incentives in place for executives and leaders that are linked to goals, which they posit will get everybody focused and lined up in the right areas. And even patients and families and many others like to latch on goals, particularly the concept of zero. that, as you know, has inspired a lot of thoughtful buzz and concern among safety thinkers and academics who appreciate how this well-meaning concept can have unexpected consequences. But to a certain degree, these strategies work. People buy in, like really buy in. They will achieve these goals at the expense of almost everything else. And of course, that's the problem. I really can't tell you how well those strategies help safety or not, but I am going to give you a couple examples, and I could give you many more, of how competitive structures that we have in place have created perverse motivations that slow improvement. So I mentioned we have a network of 150 hospitals, and we're trying to get better together, raise the bar for all of us. So if my board incented me to reduce the rates of patient behavioral events where a patient injures a hospital employee, a reasonable strategy might be for me to focus on the individual hospitals that have the most harm. And so the hospitals in this case that have the most harm, actually we just had a centerline ship up in our rate of patient behavioral events. And when we examined it to see what the contributions to it were, we found that 2 hospitals are contributing 60% of that increase. They're actually not bad hospitals. They're awesome hospitals. It has everything to do with the measurement, who their patient population is, how many mental health beds they have, what their acuity is. But you could see that if I was going to get paid for decreasing our patient behavioral event, I might just hightail it to those hospitals and spend all my energy just in those 2 places. We're trying to raise the bar for everyone, which is not, so having a little bit of cash in my pocket isn't gonna help. Nevertheless, I wanna tell you that in pediatrics, the competitive tension is actually really pretty low. We've made remarkable progress in developing a culture of non-competition. When we first started our work, nobody shared their safety outcomes publicly. Now, almost all children's hospitals do. It used to be that there were a few hospitals that you could find it on their internal websites, but you know, people like me couldn't find it. I mean, you really had to, it was deep. And now those things are much more transparent. It's definitely evolved the way that we work together. Again, when we first started our network, we used to use the phrase, steal shamelessly. And I don't really like that phrase because we don't steal. It sort of implies something devious and reinforces the idea that we're competing. Instead, we share generously and receive graciously. And that's actually an amazingly powerful model that has accelerated safety improvement and is certainly a key to our network's success. I wish each of you could join one of our webinars and see incredible examples of people sharing documents, tools, etc., with no direct benefit to themselves other than the opportunity to be on the receiving end another day. The second principle I want to talk to you about wasn't one of our original core principles, but ended up being important, and that's distributed leadership. So we started the SPS network with about 20 passionate people. In an organization with a mission as audacious as ours to eliminate serious harm across 150 children's hospitals, it's really not possible to have too many leaders out there in the world. And so we've worked hard to build up that army and now have over 250 SPS leaders. In my role, I have had countless one-on-one phone calls with leaders because I believe it's critical for sustainable results. I work as hard as I can to create an environment that invites their engagement and innovation. I encourage them to text me and call me with an idea or a concern. My colleague Laura and I write personal notes to them every year and also offer to write to their supervisor as well, which many of them take us up on so that we can express our gratitude and acknowledge their importance. This literally takes like 4 days to complete. Why? Because I think doing this is akin to offering stock options to employees. I want them to see and feel what I believe is true, that they own this network. Because what I've seen is that as owners, they care for it, they're proud of it, they might be volunteers, but I am continually awed at the observation that these people act like SPS is their primary responsibility, and they certainly love it. I can't tell you how many of them I have had tell me that the work they do with SPS is the most rewarding part of their job. And of course, another really important thing is that these leaders/owners influence the ones who are really doing this work that I'm going to have a hard time reaching. And that's the millions of frontline providers. These are the people who are really making our hospitals safer. The third principle is our mission motivates all that we do. So every meeting starts with our mission slide, working together to eliminate serious harm across all children's hospitals. We started with just a few hospital-acquired harms that we thought were the most common and serious, and over the years we've added a few more when we've been impressed by the need to do so. For each of these, we've used the power of our network to develop evidence-based bundles that we've worked tirelessly to spread, and we'll come back to that. Last year, we published our collective results in JAMA that demonstrated what our results are above secular trends. As highlights to some of our successes, we've reduced adverse drug events, serious, by 73%, catheter-associated urinary tract infections by 47%, serious falls with injury by 82%, overexertions by 38%, unplanned extubations, that one I told you about, by 56%. So these numbers may or may not mean much to you. It's really easy to lose the humanity in the statistics. And it's hard, like in your industry, it's hard to value non-events that might signal success and safety. And we've always appreciated this challenge and have tried in various ways to bring this impact to life. And as I was preparing for this talk, I looked back at some old slides from one of our meetings in 2014. And at the time, we estimated that we had saved 1,897 children from serious harm, and said that that was more lives, thanks. And at the time, acknowledged that that was more lives than were lost when the North Tower collapse of the World Trade Center collapsed. And it felt really impressive. And I can tell some of you are impressed too. And now we're at over 30,000 lives spared harm. So I don't really have any good analogies for that. I think it might be roughly the number of breaths you take while you're at this conference. A lot of kids have been spared harm by our work. They're my kids, they're your kids, they're your grandchildren and your nieces and nephews, they're your neighbors and friends. There's the little guy in his car seat in the back of the car at the stoplight who gives you a little smile. For better or for worse, if I'm honest, we're not a group that's driven by the bottom line. But if we were, we'd have plenty of motivation because hospital-acquired harm is expensive. We developed a calculator for individual hospitals to help advocate internally, to have a sense of the dollars saved as they were making investments in safety. Health economists have done studies that help us appreciate what the typical costs are for one of these types of events. An unplanned extubation, for example, adds an average of $36,000 to the hospital bill, which incidentally is about the annual fee of the SPS membership. So it's a pretty good value proposition if you consider that if you prevent just one unplanned extubation, you've paid your dues. So our network as a whole has now averted $668 million. Again, not a money person, I don't know how to put that in perspective, but it's a lot. And we're not academics, but we've been working as hard as we can to share our learnings beyond our network. We have 20 publications, 40 abstracts in peer-reviewed journals, an additional 10 publications that are in the works. 188 abstracts were submitted for posters and presentations at our recent learning session. People who work in safety in pediatrics generally don't have a hard time staying connected to our mission, which is a real advantage we have. We have a pretty dang compelling mission. I mean, maybe even better than anything anybody could ever make up. It starts off with these like adorable human organisms. And then we've got the first do no harm thing that we all signed up for. And if you put those two together, how about we work together not to hurt little kids? So overall, the satisfaction and joy that comes from working towards our mission gives people in Children's Hospital a purpose and a fulfillment that's something, it turns out, that people really crave. A lot of work has gone into this. We built our network on the concept that we must explicitly address the culture of safety, not just process improvement. So we've trained over 500,000 healthcare providers in basic safety behaviors. Most of those you would love, a few of them would make you cringe. But we also thought about the other end of the spectrum. We've trained almost 3,000 board members who come into our in-person board trainings that are focused on safety governance. Honest to God, if I had to only do one thing, I would do that. Because the reverberations from that are really quite amazing. As the mysterious voice says, if you build it, they will come. In the last couple of years, I've become acutely aware of how I've taken for granted this mission. For example, how we found it so much more difficult to motivate healthcare frontline workers to take care of themselves and their peers than the children for whom they care. So about 6 years into this, so now about 6 or 7 years ago, we came to the realization that we needed to explicitly focus on employee staff safety and not just patient safety. You know, we told ourselves things that like, you know, how can we expect employees to keep the patients safe if they're not safe? And the great part was that there were lots of best practices. I mean, you all have created them. We weren't going to need to figure out how to lift a box. That was all available. So we started hammering all these insights into our front line. We made lovely best practice documents and held educational sessions, et cetera, et cetera. And we were particularly wanted to work on those overexertions or back injuries, which can be very debilitating in children's hospitals. So we worked on it, and years passed, and nothing happened. And I was like, what the hell? I mean, these are, why? So we brought together some focus groups of frontline providers, and we started talking about it. And they said, yeah, we know how to lift a box. We saw the sign, we went to the training. And we said, well, what about your leadership? Do they not care about this? And they said, oh no, you know, they stand up there at the forums and they say, your safety is so important to us. So what's the problem? Like, why does it not happen? Well, you see, we only have 2 lifts that work, and one of them's downstairs, and it won't fit in the elevator. And you know, when radiology calls and they say the MRI is only open for 20 minutes, we got to get that kid on that bed and over. And so it became clear that although leadership genuinely wanted their employees to be safe, that they weren't behaving in a way that facilitated that. Furthermore, the alignment from the top to the bottom of the organization was kind of a disaster, especially related to employee safety, where there was a VP of HR, a VP of OC Health, a VP of Safety, and these people were not communicating and no one was really owning it. So we decided to try an experiment, and we asked the children's hospitals, we just want a few brave volunteers to be in a cohort to test something. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to do nothing with the front line. We don't want any frontline people. What we want are managers, directors, executives, and the board. And we got 12 brave volunteers to be in this cohort. And what we spent time talking about is how you lead and how you behave as a leader if you want to promote employee staff safety and reduce overexertions in particular. And 9 months later, we had a 38% decrease in overexertions. It was so insightful. It's still a huge challenge though, because those leaders who stepped forward to participate had a very high degree of humility. They were willing to consider the idea that they weren't doing it quite right. And it's not clear to me that the other 138 CEOs are really going to have the same attitude about it. So that's going to be work ahead for us. These leaders were from children's hospitals, by the way, of all different shapes and sizes, which actually brings me to my next movie. Moneyball, great movie. Baseball movie, stars Brad Pitt as Billy Beane. He's the general manager of the Oakland A's, who has an epiphany that baseball's conventional wisdom is all wrong. He's faced with a tight budget and decides to reinvent his team by outsmarting all the richer ball clubs. He joins forces with an Ivy League graduate named Peter Brand, and they prepare to challenge old school traditions. So what he does is he recruits these bargain basement players whom the scouts have labeled as flawed, but who he thinks have game-winning potential based on math. And in the end, he shows that even small or financially disadvantaged franchise can win. So that brings me to my next principle, all teach, all learn. At the beginning of the SPS network, we embraced this principle. We're going to be all about all teach, all learn. We said it all the time, too. But I'm actually not 100% sure we believed it. I sensed back then that the big resource children's hospitals felt that if all teach, all learn were a spectrum, they were going to spend most of their time teaching. And if I'm honest, I think there was some degree of hubris on the part of those hospitals. I mean, if you're a 500-bed children's hospital and you have an army for a safety team, what is this 50-bed children's hospital with 1.7 FTE really going to teach you? Nevertheless, it was a very respectful notion on which to build a network. That is, no matter how big or how small or how long or short a time you've been working on this, that you can have some critical insights. And now, more than a decade into this, I can tell you that some of our greatest insights have come actually from smaller, less resourced children's hospitals who are often more nimble, more focused, and able to test ideas more expeditiously than their larger, more resourced colleagues who might be handicapped by too many priorities, too many initiatives, too many goals. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure that there's not a one of the leaders at those smaller children's hospitals who wouldn't give their right arm for a fraction of the resources in one of the bigger hospitals, but they actually find a way. And just like the Oakland A's, several of these hospitals have demonstrated phenomenal results. One of the insights that Billy has in Moneyball was that the entire system for valuing players was biased. a bias towards these charismatic, glamorous players who play high-risk baseball. They're just swinging for the fences and stealing bases. So in 2021, SPS did a study of the two most prevalent harms that we collect: unplanned extubations, which you all now know what that is, and something called central line associated bloodstream infections. So very tiny babies, very sick children, and children receiving things like chemotherapy can't just have regular IVs. They have to have large bore catheters that essentially go directly to their heart. These are central lines. I don't need to tell you that getting one of these infected, no good. So what we did was we decided that we wanted to stratify the outcomes data for unplanned extubation and CLABSI by race and ethnicity to see if we could detect any statistically significant differences in safety outcomes. And before the study, there were many people that thought we were on a fool's errand. I mean, these are hospital-acquired conditions. There aren't going to be any differences. One hospital leader even wrote me a strongly worded email explaining that his hospital would not be participating. "We at XYZ Children's Hospital," he wrote, "will not be participating in this effort. We treat all children the same." Fortunately, around 30 hospitals did participate, and what we exposed were disturbing results that add to the mountain of evidence that points to the reality that somehow our system is fundamentally biased in a way that advantages certain children over others. And while we like to point to social determinants of health like poverty as causes for disparities, with hospital-acquired conditions, the theory becomes more tenuous. What your family income is or what zip code your house sits in cannot easily explain why Black children have an unplanned extubation rate 3 standard deviations higher than the average of all races. In Moneyball, Billy acknowledged these biases and changed the system for the Oakland A's. By eliminating bias, he helped world-class baseball players who had previously seen their talents ignored or even belittled achieve the success that had previously eluded them. Similarly, if we mean what we say about caring for every child, we'll have to own these biases, work to understand them, and lead the change in the system that currently devalues some of them. So if you're not compelled by the moral duty to assure equitable care, identifying and eliminating disparities is actually a heck of a good improvement strategy overall. In fact, I would suggest that we're not going to achieve our organizational mission if we don't. So I know this is a little bit of a controversial topic, but at SPS, we're choosing to do our best not to get mixed up in the politics, instead stay focused on our mission. We're working hard to identify areas where safety outcome disparities exist, because that is an opportunity. But it's not just identifying them and analyzing them, it's having the courage and the wherewithal to test interventions to improve them. So after we got those results, we launched a new improvement cohorts, which employed focused interventions that were designed to eliminate these disparities. In one, for example, we're using the proactive safety huddles for all children who have experienced an unplanned extubation that just happened to disproportionately, as I suggested earlier, be Black or African American. This is bringing thoughtfulness and resources to children who are at the highest risk. And guess what? Just a year later, although our overall unplanned extubation rate is continuing to drop, the disparity is getting narrower. So it's not enough, we need to do more. There's one scene of Moneyball where Billy Beane is talking to the Oakland A's head scout, who essentially thinks Billy is nuts and that his whacked out theories are not just false, but also dangerous. And he famously stands his ground and states the fundamental truth: adapt or die. The problem we are faced with is an adaptive challenge, not a technical one. It's not going to be a process tweak or increasing our bundle reliability for unplanned extubations by 2% more. That's not going to eliminate unplanned extubations. We're going to have to fundamentally change, and that's hard and against the grain, especially the grain of where we started. And we do a lot of things to undermine ourselves and undermine the concept of adaptation. We put all kinds of barriers up in front of frontline workers who want nothing more professionally than to provide outstanding, safe care to children. We do it inadvertently, but it's real. One example is the electronic medical record. While I don't doubt that there are considerable advantages to electronic medical records, cost capture to say the very least, the impact on patient safety is really quite ambiguous. And a number of studies have demonstrated ways in which this form of documentation has come between clinicians and their will and ability to provide excellent care. Multiple studies have examined frontline providers' documentation time pre and post electronic medical record implementation and found that a doctor's time documenting in front of a computer went from 16% up to almost 50% of their day documenting. And a nurse's went from 9% to 23%. At the same time, other studies have shown that the longer hours spent on documentation are responsible for clinicians' sense of loss of autonomy, lack of work-life balance, poor relationships with colleagues, and not surprisingly, burnout. Another example hits a little closer to home for safety leaders. Although not one of our principles, our original network approach was built on the concept that we need to identify best practices, name them as a standard that we call a bundle, and then poke and prod and goad people everywhere to comply with them. To oversimplify, if we could just get everyone to do the damn identified standard reliably, we'd be playing for the pennant. This worked very, very well for many years, as is evidenced by some of the results that I shared with you. We saw that as reliability increased to one of our SPS process bundles, rates of that type of harm went down. Oh, how pleased we were. The problem is that standardization, adaptation, and innovation are strange bedfellows. In fact, they don't even live in the same house. Standardization in the form of process bundles or policies or standard operating procedures takes some of the thinking out of the work of the patient care in the hopes of replacing variability with best practice. This might be a concept that works producing toilet paper or toasters or Cadillacs, where you want everyone to have the same efficiency and quality. But we've applied it liberally in children's healthcare in the hopes of making our organization safer. Almost every harm area in SPS has a set of these standard processes. And we've historically asked hospitals to audit, measure, and report reliability to these. We then spent a lot of energy toward the goal of reaching and sustaining 95% reliability. So if you remember Todd's stick yesterday, worker obedience was at the bottom. While much of our success to date was associated with this approach, I'm afraid that we have now entered a new world, a world I call asymptopia. The rates of decline of some of our most common harms is planing off. And that's a problem for sure. And there are other downsides to what I call the culture or cult of reliability. Two I'd like to highlight today are the stifling of innovation and resilience. During COVID and the immediate aftermath, as you know, there was a critical shortage of nurses that frustrated everyone and also fostered the phenomenon of the traveling nurse. This was a frustrating situation for frontline teams because many new people were being introduced who didn't know the policies and procedures and didn't know the bundles and weren't doing things the same way the locals did. And I don't know the evidence, if there is any, on the overall impact that traveling nurses and the traveling nurse phenomenon had on safety in the COVID era. But what I will tell you is that I've heard numerous examples of clinical leaders who, while continuing to acknowledge how difficult it was to have new people join a team, also acknowledged that they've changed the way they do things after learning a better way to do it from one of the traveling nurses. An uncontrolled study in frontline innovation. So much of this focus on reliability and doing it that way that there's no clear, open, structured, endorsed space for exploring alternatives. The culture of reliability discourages a mindset that's trying to find new and better ways. We've taken the data-driven, evidence-based standards that we're oh so proud of and then adopted the flawed assumption that we have it right. The second is that the culture of reliability runs the risk of disrespecting instead of inspiring the care providers and undermining instead of building upon the value of what I pointed out is one of the most powerful drivers of healthcare excellence. That is the uber-strong will of frontline providers to take the best and safest care of children. A focus on standardization and reliability makes them feel like automatons, or even worse, takes away their judgment, wisdom, and insights to adjust when the complexity of the situation calls for it. At its worst moments, the culture of reliability also discourages equity. I've already told you that the risk of experiencing an unplanned extubation is not the same for all children. And yet our culture of reliability has no flexibility in it to consider the fact that different children might have different needs. Our approach has been too rigid if we're going to eliminate this type of harm. Remember what I told you my colleague from XYZ Children's Hospital said about our work to detect disparities? He said, "We treat all children the same." Indeed. And he told me that as though it were a virtue. We have succeeded in making reliability a virtue, and now we don't believe it's a virtuous approach at all. Some children will need something more or something different to be safe in our care, and situations will arise that require adaptation to achieve the very best care. But perhaps the worst part of all is how this intense plan to standardize that perhaps could be characterized as a powerful desire of leaders to overmanage. This approach doesn't just disrespect and undermine the people at the front line, it greatly minimizes the extraordinary complexity that exists within the healthcare system and handcuffs one of our most important safeguards, the skilled people who are doing the work at the front line. Forcing standardization as a preeminent value in our work limits our ability to honor the complexity in the healthcare industry and build resilient systems that can adapt to ever-changing and uncertain circumstances. We've been fortunate to hear from some amazing thought leaders in safety this week. Fortunately for me, I've had a professional conversion experience, like a real one. To illustrate it a bit, I want to pull in one of my all-time favorite baseball movie monologues. It's the opening by Susan Sarandon's character in Bull Durham. And while I play it for you, I want you to listen carefully to her words because I'm going to come back to them.
I believe in the Church of Baseball. I've tried all the major religions and most of the minor ones. I've worshipped Buddha, Allah, Brahma, Vishnu, Siva, trees, mushrooms, and Isadora Duncan. I know things. For instance, there are 108 beads in a Catholic rosary, and there are 108 stitches in a baseball. When I learned that, I gave Jesus a chance. But it just didn't work out between us. The Lord laid too much guilt on me. I prefer metaphysics to theology. You see, there's no guilt in baseball, and it's never boring, which makes it like sex. There's never been a ball player slept with me who didn't have the best year of his career. Making love is like hitting a baseball. You just gotta relax and concentrate. Besides, I'd never sleep with a player hitting under 250, well, unless he had a lot of RBIs. There was a great glove man up the middle. You see, there's a certain amount of life wisdom I give these boys. I can expand their minds. Sometimes when I've got a ball player alone, I'll just read Emily Dickinson or Walt Whitman to him. And the guys are so sweet, they always stay and listen. Of course, a guy will listen to anything if he thinks it's foreplay. I make them feel confident, and they make me feel safe and pretty. Of course, what I give them lasts a lifetime. What they give me lasts 142 games. Sometimes it seems like a bad trade. But bad trades are part of baseball. I mean, who can forget Frank Robinson for Milt Pappas, for God's sake? It's a long season, and you gotta trust it. I've tried them all, I really have. And the only church that truly feeds the soul day in, day out is the Church of Baseball.
So in January of 2023, I attended the Johns Hopkins All Children's Hospital Safety 2 Conference. And I didn't know it, but there were 30 other safety professionals from SPS Children's Hospitals who were also in attendance and were influenced by the speakers who were there, who were some safety legends. Todd Conklin, David Proven, Eric Holnagel, Diane Chadwick-Jones, to name a few. And so the attendees were properly exposed to new ways of thinking about safety from realms of safety to resilience and human factors engineering, human and organizational performance. And all of these approaches have at their base the premise that error-prone, freewheeling humans aren't the problem, they're the solution. These approaches, which we've begun to abbreviate sort of collectively as proactive safety for the purposes of our discussions, have the advantage of taking advantage of the powerful drive of healthcare providers to use their incredible brains to do the right thing. They acknowledge that the greatest insights will come from learning from the way they do their everyday work and the ways that they can demonstrate extraordinary adaptive capacity. Whether it's an unexpected clinical scenario or a global pandemic. I discovered when I gathered all the SPS people together a few weeks later after the conference that they all had the same sense that they'd had hands laid on and were now guided by what we all agreed to call these principles of proactive safety. And from then on, our experience as safety leaders has changed. So I think about Susan Sarandon's description in this context. And if you don't mind, I've taken the liberty to adapt it to my own experience, and you can see if it resonates with you. I believe in the Church of Proactive Safety. I've studied all the major religions. I've worshiped Buddha, Allah, Brahma, auditing, bundles, compliance, air types, retraining, root causes, standard work, blame, punishment, policies, procedures, never events. I know things. For instance, organizations feel better about themselves after an event if they can identify someone to blame. And auditing produces data that executives love. When I heard that, I gave Safety 1 a chance. But it just didn't work out for me. The Lord laid so much guilt on me for disrespecting the front line, and our outcomes plateaued. I now prefer learning to retraining. It's never boring. And if you do it right, it feels like real teamwork. I never met a frontline worker who didn't have something to teach me. You know, learning is like hitting a baseball. You gotta shut up and focus. Because there's a certain amount of life wisdom these workers have. They can expand our understanding of if work is done and show us better ways. Sometimes when I have a worker all alone, I read Todd Conklin or David Woods to them. And these people are so sweet, they always stay and listen. Of course, a guy will listen to anyone if he thinks people are listening back. I make them feel confident that I'm working as hard as I can to improve the system so they can do the jobs they signed up for safely and effectively. And they make me feel useful. Of course, I can't always give them instantaneous solutions to big safety problems, and what they give me lasts a lifetime. Sometimes it feels like a bad trade, but trade-offs are common in safety. It's a long road, and you gotta trust. I've tried them all, I really have, but the only church that truly feeds the soul day to day is the Church of Proactive Safety. What do you think? Pretty good? Okay, so I'm out of time, but can I have 2 more minutes, Charles? Thanks. All right, I'm gonna skip, you gotta watch The Rookie, but I'm gonna skip that one. And I just wanna talk just for a second about empathy. And there's actually a quote from The Rookie where a mentor of Dennis Quaid's character says, "Empathy can be painful, but the alternative for me is unthinkable. I do this job to help people, and I have to feel for them." So as a leader of 150 Hospital Collaborative, a lesson learned to me relates to understanding what empathy means when it comes to sharing best practices and how damn hard it is to implement them. So I don't have any books for you to sign. You all need to keep writing the books and the white papers. What we're gonna focus on is implementation, and we've learned some hard lessons. With unplanned extubations, we got a little bit of data, we wrote a white paper, a change package, we shared it with our network, we watched our results, no change for 1 year, until we got in there and we said, let us help you do it. Let's put together work groups. How do you get the data? How do you build the will? How do you change practice? How do you learn from the front line? And then we started seeing the rapid improvement. So this work that we at SPS and other organizations and industries do that has at its aim to keep humans safe, it's a team sport for sure. You got your managers and your shortstops and your designated hitters, but we all have to work together to fundamentally improve safety, and that, it turns out, is tough. The challenges are really formidable, and it's easy to get discouraged. Uh-oh, Ron, go back. Thanks. So as Tom Hanks' character said in A League of Their Own to his star player Dottie, as she was about to quit right before the World Series, it's supposed to be hard. If it wasn't hard, everyone would do it. The hard is what makes it great. The hard is what makes it great. So we're all doing something hard, but most certainly great. And I know we're all in a hurry to make progress, but we have to remember the wise counsel of Bad News Bears coach Morris Buttermaker. Come on, fellas. Rome wasn't built in a day. to which one of his players replied, "Yeah, it took several hundred years." But there's no crying in baseball, so batter up. Thank you.